All right, great. We have so many of you actually.
We do have a full house here, huh?
Yeah.
Okay,
And then we're
so
just gonna wait for a minute and then we'll get started. Yeah. And also Layla, would you mind start the slides projection?
Yes.
I see some people have raised their hand. Do you know like how do we deal with that?
Raise hand.
Yes, if you look at the attendees, like Vadim has raised his hand. Do we?
Yeah, because I should see that option, but for some reason I don't see that on my screen.
In the attendees, don't you? I see it. Who are the?
I think he put his hand down.
Okay. All right. But is there a protocol, Zeddy, that you wanna like tell people about?
For raise hand, yeah, because I think when we get started, and then we will go through those, right? Because it's everything. Because normally for raising hand is asking a question, and then we should go to discuss post. So we will dive into more about that when we get started.
Right.
Oh wow, we almost have 60 people on the call, almost.
Maybe just wait a couple more minutes just to let people come in and. But really glad to have you guys here. We are really excited for the first community call.
It's great to see a lot of familiar faces as well. I know I've spoken to some of you guys in the last few weeks.
Nice. All right. Do you want to get started, Zenny?
Yep, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dgraph's first community call. Before we kick it off, just to let everybody know, we were recording the whole session. And also I want to introduce the team really quick. Start with me. My name is Zenny. I'm the Director of Marketing at Dgraph. And next I'm going to pass on to our one and only founder and CEO, Manish.
Hey guys, I'm Manish. I'm the founder of Dgraph and the author of Dgraph and Badger. And really excited to have you guys here. We have been thinking about having sort of office hours / community call for a while. And it just took us a while to like get it together, but really thankful to the team for putting it together and just seeing like how many people have attended this call. It's a great signal that people do want this call, and hopefully we can run it at a regular cadence, like at least every month or something. So again, very excited to have you guys here.
And Manish, who do you want to pass it to?
Or do I need to pass it? Let's pass it to Ibrahim.
Hey everyone, hi, I'm Ibrahim. I take care of Badger DB at Dgraph. I've been here for some time now, and all this time I've been taking care of Badger DB. So yeah, really excited to be here. So I'm gonna pass this on to Pawan now.
Hey everyone, it's Pawan here. I've been mostly working on the GraphQL features. So like that's what I'll also be talking about, like all the new and like all the new GraphQL features that we have released in 2007. And it's great to see you guys here. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this call and talking about the features. I think I'll pass it to Tejas.
Hey everyone. So I know some of you would have spoken to me. My name is Tejas. I'm heading cloud at Dgraph. If we get any questions about cloud, I'll be answering them. We're all excited about the beta of /GraphQL, which is what's going on right now. And let us know if you want an invite to that. I'm going to pass it over to Layla, who's been coordinating Dgraph releases.
Hi, I'm Layla Galatin. I'm the technical project manager at Dgraph, and I'm very, very excited for the first community call. I was waiting for this for a long time, so I'm happy that it's finally happening. Thank you for attending. And Zenny, back to you. I think everyone went.
We also have Daniel.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Daniel joined. Daniel, you're glad you're here. Go ahead.
Hey folks, I'm Daniel Mai. I'm the community lead here at Dgraph. Super excited to have this community call with everybody.
Yes, Daniel, someone just yell your name in the chat. They're so excited to see you.
Hey, Dimitri, nice to see you.
All right, before we kick it off, we actually have a full packed content for everyone here today. But before we kick it off, just a few things. So again, we're going to record the session later today. Once I got the recording, I will upload it to Dgraph's YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed it, please go to youtube.com/dgraphlabs and subscribe. And we also trying to make this whole session interactive. I know we got a bunch of questions and all the teams member have reviewed the question. We'll try to get to all of them, but we might miss some, and I hope, but we will get back to you on discuss. And I think the most important thing is we will not accept any questions on the Zoom Q&A. We have disabled that. So if you do have any question, you can still go to the link on the slides right now. You will appear on every single slide. Which is bit.ly/dgraph-call. You will take you to Dgraph Discuss, and then you can post your question there. And then we will live moderate those questions and feed them to the speakers. All right.
And I think one thing there is that we'll also, for the questions that we don't get to today, we will try our best to actually respond to them on Discuss itself. So you guys can still get your questions answered. I am cognizant of the fact that we only have 1 hour and we have a lot of questions considering it's this first call. But even if we can't answer your questions right now, we will still get to them very soon on Discuss.
All right, so today's agenda, we have 2 things. First is, as many of you already know, we introduced the new features in 2007.0. We codenamed it Savvy Shuri. And that will be the first part. The second part, we will take the questions from the community. So Leila can go to the next slide. Yeah, and also, surprise, for all of you who attended live, since it's our first call, so you will receive a free Dgraph t-shirt. We have all your registration and email addresses. What's gonna happen is after the call, we will follow up with you with a separate email, and you will receive a coupon code from us, and then we will send you the address to the Dgraph swag store. And then once you put in the coupon code, your shipping and the t-shirt will be for free, and then it will be shipped directly to your place. Hope you guys like it. All right, next slide. Okay, pass to Manish.
Yes, first thing first, we just made the release for Dgraph 20.07.0, which is again for the first time we have codenamed to Savvy Shuri. Our great designer Marisa came up with this design. Absolutely loved it the moment I saw it, and the way to refer to these, the reason to actually have code names is it's obviously inspired by Ubuntu, but also just like so much easier to refer to a release. You don't have to say 20.07.0. You just say Savvy Shuri, you just say Shuri. And then as we do like 20.07.1, 20.07.2, you can call it like Shuri 1, Shuri 2, and so on and so forth. So it just makes it very easy for us to like communicate about it internally and externally. Obviously inspired by all the giants before us, like Android does that, Apple does that, so on and so forth, right? We added a whole bunch of, GraphQL has been a big push for us at Dgraph. We have been sort of like tiptoeing ourselves around GraphQL for a while, but our community has been asking for it constantly. And so last year we started this big initiative to introduce official GraphQL support. And so in 20.03, we added like a whole bunch of initial features, and in 20.07, we expanded that feature set. So we added GraphQL subscriptions, built-in authorization, and custom logic. And in the next slides, Pawan is going to take you through them. Pawan is our lead for GraphQL efforts. And we also made some other change. Sorry, just 1 sec. We also made some changes to Facets. The format change, which is a breaking change. I think Daniel is going to like quickly walk you through that. We also added a bunch of enterprise features around Vault integration and online restores. Because this is a community call, we won't talk too much about it, but you can see all of that in the discuss post that we have for the release. And I just put the link right here. All right, moving to the next slide. Over to you, Paul.
Hi everyone again. So the first feature I'm going to talk about is GraphQL subscriptions. It's a heavily requested feature. We have been asked for this feature multiple times. So as you guys would know, like the people who have used GraphQL earlier, you had this functionality that you could give us a type and we would automatically generate like a CRUD API, or like essentially an API in which you can do nested joins and traversals, and also do things like pagination and sorting and stuff. So a lot of people were asking for GraphQL subscriptions. And now what you can do is on a type, you can just annotate it with something called @with subscription. And if you do that, then we like for example, earlier we used to generate get and the query calls for each type. So for a type to do, you would have you essentially would have had get to do and query to do. And now like after you annotate a type with subscription, you would like what you would essentially get is you would basically get subscription calls for those particular calls. So now you would have two subscriptions generated, one for a get to do and the other for a subscribe to do, in which you can get a list of to dos. So essentially what happens here is that whenever anything changes on your backend, your client would receive a new message with all the data for the query, and it essentially happens automatically. So like with something like this, you can build a UI which is responsive, and you can just subscribe for updates from your backend, and anytime anything changes, you get back the whole response and you can just re-render it. And it's very easy to get started with it. You can just update your schema and add the with subscription directive, and essentially your GraphQL schema would be updated and have these two subscription queries. We also wrote a blog post about this, and that talks about how to use subscriptions with the Apollo client. I pasted the link here, so you can go there and you can give the example a try, and it's like a whole walkthrough which teaches you from the beginning to the end that how do you use Apollo, which is like the most popular client for doing subscriptions, and how can you use it with Dgraph to subscribe for updates and get the updates and just render them to the UI. So this is the first feature, and so essentially I'm hoping that you guys would go back and try it and give us some feedback on how it works for you, or if there are things that we can improve. But yeah, so it was a heavily requested feature, and we are very happy that it's live now.
And I think one thing is that I think some people asked on community that how do they access subscriptions? We don't have a client for that yet, right, Pawan?
We don't have a Go client, but you can use any JavaScript client, like essentially any JavaScript GraphQL client, like the Apollo client, and it works out of the box. Like it essentially works out of the box with any of the clients. It works with GraphQL Playground, with Insomnia, and with other tools. So it works with any GraphQL compatible client.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Next slide.
We can move to the next one. Yeah. One more very cool feature that we have built is built-in authorization. So what you could do earlier is you could have types, and we generated automatic CRUD API for that, but you did not have any way to authorize different parts of that type information. So what we've introduced in this version is we've introduced an auth directive. And in the auth directive, you have multiple options, one option for query, another option for add, another for update, and the fourth option for delete, which gives you more control about like over who has access to what all operations for a type. And the way you use it is that you use the auth directive, and you can give a rule for a query and an add and an update and a delete. And based on the rule, it's decided that which user has access to what things. So one more thing to note here is we don't make any assumptions about the service that you're using for authentication. You could be using Auth0, OneGraph, any service. All that we require is we require a config from you, which gives us the public key of the service that you're using, and some more information which enables us to essentially validate the JWT, which is being used for authorization. So what you would do here is that you would use some authentication service, you would get a JWT, and you would just pass that to Dgraph. And based on the rules inside the JWT, based on the custom claims, we would evaluate the authorization rules. So now what you can do is you can do cool things like, say if you had a to-do and you wanted to ensure that only a user who is the owner of a to-do can see the to-dos, then you can write that in a rule. And you can say that while accessing to-dos, only show to-dos to a user for which they are the owner. Or what you could do is that you could have like something which, so for example, if you see on the right, then we have type user, and we have a rule that if the role is admin, only then they should be able to query the user or get the user. So you have two types of access control that you can do here. One is based on a role, that's a role-based access control, and the other is based on an attribute, which is which is based on the value of an attribute within the type that you can do. So you have both like role-based and access-based, role-based and attribute-based access control now out of the box for you. And all that you need to do is you need to just annotate your types with the auth directive and with the correct rules, and it would just work for you automatically. And we have more docs, like more detailed docs about both these directives and different kind of possibilities here like on the GraphQL docs. So you can go there, and we have like more concrete examples on how you can integrate it into your existing GraphQL application.
Pawan, could you like maybe give them a link for the docs around authorization?
Yeah, so I pasted the link here. It's graphql.dgraph.io/docs/authorization.
Okay.
So they can go to this link,
there
and
it
we
is.
have like a proper walkthrough about different ways to do it.
Got it. It's the last line. I just skipped that because it doesn't have the whole blue link thingy.
Oh,
Yeah, and do we have some examples there as well of how to enable authorization and all that?
Yep. We have examples there. And also we plan to come up with like more examples on integrations with Auth0. So we'll be having like video tutorials and blog posts coming up, which will walk to you to like essentially it will be a walkthrough by integrating through Auth0 and then getting into Dgraph and evaluating different complex authorization rules. So that's also coming pretty soon in the next couple of weeks.
Got it. Awesome.
I think we can move to the next slide. Cool. So this is the third big feature that we implemented, which is custom resolvers. So what was happening was that people were building their applications, and whatever they had in terms of the CRUD API was really powerful. But then what they wanted to do is they like essentially in some cases, some of the data was stored outside Dgraph. So people were asking for a way to be able to to be able to get some of the data from outside of Dgraph. This data could essentially be a Lambda function, or it could be coming from some other GraphQL API. Like for example, one example could be that you have a billing service that's interacting with Stripe, and you want to get users like payment information from Stripe, or you are essentially building an integration between your service and GitHub, and you want to be able to get some information from GitHub. So for example, for being able to do all these things, we introduced something called custom resolvers, and custom resolvers allow you to resolve a query or a mutation or a field by making another custom call to another HTTP endpoint. Now, this HTTP endpoint could be anything. It could be Lambda function, and it could be a REST call, anything. And it essentially also supports batching to be able to make the it should not be making as many calls as the number of entities. But if you choose the batch mode, then it just makes one call, no matter how many entities you have at each level for your graph, for essentially your query. And we have again, essentially we have more docs at doc custom. And one more feature that's coming soon is that you soon you'll be able to perform advanced queries by executing GraphQL plus minus queries as part of the custom resolver. And this is a feature that's already available on /GraphQL. So if you're a /GraphQL customer, it should already be out there for you. But yeah, this is another feature that was requested heavily, and we have released the initial version of it, and we'll essentially continue building on it and improving it in the next version. But you guys should definitely try it out, and a lot of people have already tried it out and been able to build like more complex applications by using this.
And I think like something that's in works right now is the ability to use JavaScript code to run it to allow like even stronger. So you don't even have to have an external service to run your custom logic. And so we are investigating how we could integrate that into Dgraph, so that you can just give Dgraph like some JavaScript code, and it can just run it as we process GraphQL queries. Essentially, I think what we're trying to get to is to decrease the number of layers that a typical GraphQL user app developer has to run, and that would actually remove one more layer of indirection, which is always great.
Yep, that's also something that we're working on, and it will be part of the next release. So it's already in development, and we're working on the RFC. And actually, you guys can go to discuss and look at the RFC and comment or comment on it and see that if it would work for you. But you can also suggest any improvements that you'd like to it.
And I think we can put the link to RFC in the discuss post, so people have it. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Next slide.
So this is covering one of the changes in 2007, which is the Facets format. So we had a number of folks chime into us and say, hey, you know, the mutation format and the query format for facets, they're not really easy to work with. So in 2007, we aligned these two. So it should be much not only nicer from the, you know, the response standpoint, but also it aligns correctly with, hey, the mutation format has more symmetry with the response format. So in this case, you see the previous format is you have state as an edge here, and state with the pipe in capital says that the facet capital is set to false. We actually just bring this up to the node, which is exactly how you would set it in Dgraph in any case. You go to the next slide. This is for a list of UIDs. So the way we returned this before was, hey, we would give you a separate field that has like sort of an index key. So it says for the edges, speaks name Spanish and speaks name Chinese. The facets for the corresponding edges before were true and false, where the index position was 0 in the list before for true and 1 for false. So there's a big disconnect here between the formats. And so the new one, we just like bring these facets together, which again is exactly how you do in the mutation. So there's more symmetry here where the query is something you can then send to a mutation. And similarly, this slide is for list UIDs, but we also change it for list of scalar values like integers, where it would give you the list back in facets. Again, these are breaking changes, meaning your applications should like know how to work with these new response formats. But overall, this also aligns with like the previous facet format we had, and just makes the experience better.
I think there's a comment on the chat saying that this change, I guess the changes about facet format change is great, but sometimes doesn't make sense conceptually. So I think, do we have like a post about this change and the reasoning and stuff, Daniel, on Discuss?
Yeah, we can link to that in the Discuss topic.
Yeah, that'd be great. So I think I know that we have thought about this, like, you know, multiple people at Dgraph has been thinking about this problem, and it's just like a hard problem to solve, because whatever you do, there's always like, you know, not a great solution which just works for everybody. And so if you have ideas, like, please bring them up in the Discuss topic.
Yep.
And just a quick one on the JavaScript thing. I think one of the questions is that how about PageRank and other algorithms? Would that be part of JavaScript framework? No, JavaScript framework is really around helping people write custom business logic, generally corresponding to anything really. But the idea came from GraphQL because we're adding like so many features to GraphQL and we want to avoid layers. We need to have a way by which people can write their custom logic in Dgraph itself. PageRank and other graph algorithms, our line of thinking has been that those should be built outside of Dgraph. And we don't have any near-term sort of plan to add PageRank to Dgraph itself. All right, let's go to the next. Cool. So we are going over to community Q&A. Any comments? Anything else that we're missing? You are muted. You are muted.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think we got all the comments.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go through the questions on Discuss. I'm going to repeat the questions and then sort of figure out who should be answering this. The first question is, I don't have a question, more of a request. I'm a noob in Auth, so please demonstrate authentication and authorization, possibly maybe with Firebase Auth as well. Pawan?
I think the answer to this question is that we essentially have a plan to add more docs about this. We have a plan to add more examples about how different authentication mechanisms can be used with the Dgraph auth. So in the next couple of weeks, you can see more example posts about this.
And does it work with Firebase Auth?
It should work with any auth which gives you a JWT signed, which can be verified. So if Firebase gives that, then it should work.
I see. Great. Okay. Second question is, Let me see, infrastructure related questions. Let me actually jump to that. Yes, okay.
Sorry, Manish, actually, before you go to that, there was a related question in chat that I just wanted to answer quickly. People are asking, do we support JWT refresh tokens in Dgraph? I just wanted to call out that what Dgraph actually does is it's authorization, not authentication. So, you still use Firebase, which will Firebase or Auth0, and that handles the refresh token and all that logic. We just handle the authorization from those custom claims.
And as somebody who always gets confused between these two terms, authorization and authentication, I think like maybe a good way to think about it is that we don't generate the JORD tokens, we only use them. So you get it generated from somewhere else and we will use them, right?
Yep.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Cool. All right, going over to infrastructure related questions. What are your best practices for scaling Dgraph clusters, Daniel?
Scaling Dgraph clusters. So definitely, you can run Dgraph in the minimum configuration of, say, 101 alpha. And if you want high availability or data sharding, you add more alphas to the system. You also have more zeros for high availability as well. But definitely, if you need more instances, Dgraph is horizontally scalable to work with that. And you can add instances on demand, right? So if you want to say you're doing testing, you're starting with the minimum configuration of 101 alpha, but you want to add more, you don't have to restart from scratch. You can just add more instances to the cluster.
Yeah, so I think Dgraph does not auto scale, but you can scale it as an operator, a human operator. They can like just add more nodes and they can remove nodes to like kind of scale it up and down. Is that the right way to characterize this?
Yeah, there's no auto scaling in Dgraph. It's about as an operator you can choose the configuration you need to have.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can write scripts to achieve auto scaling, but Dgraph would not just automatically say, "Hey, let me just add a few more instances to myself." Like that's not like Dgraph should not do that. This is beyond the scope for Dgraph. And so, like the question is, how can auto scaling be properly achieved in a Kubernetes cluster? I don't think it can, right? Because of this exact reason.
Yeah, again, if you can have the scripts to do the auto scaling, but Dgraph's not going to do anything automatic on your behalf.
Yeah.
You can add more pods to Kubernetes. You can remove them if you wish, but these are all operator tasks.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason like we did it this way because, well, there's precedences as well. Yeah, and so because Dgraph is a state keeping machinery, we don't want to like just add some more things because that would allow that would move some data because Dgraph does automatic data rebalancing. That's what Dgraph does. And so we don't want to muck with all of that. We really want you to tell Dgraph when to do that. How are sharding and replication managed during scale up? How are sharding and replication managed during scale down? So I can talk about that quickly. So if you scale up as an operator, you add more nodes to Dgraph and you have set replication to, let's say 3, you only have 1 alpha initially. Then the next 2 alphas that you add to the cluster would be replicas of the first one. The 4th alpha that you add to the cluster would be a shard, would become another group. So the first 3 would be group 1, the next 3 would be group 2, and group 1 would be 3 alphas, and let's say you have 6 alphas, so then group 2 will be 3 alphas, and then group 3 could be 3 alphas as well, so and so forth. And the data among these groups, Dgraph would try its best to spread the data evenly across these groups. So sharding replication happens sort of automatically if you add the nodes to the cluster. During scale down, though, it's a bit tricky because the machines that let's say you want to get rid of group 3, so you need to first move that data by issuing commands to 0 to move data from group 3 over to group 1 or 2, and once group 3 is empty, then you can turn off those machines. And Daniel, could you like talk about how that works?
Yeah, so as an operator, you can choose to say, I want to remove this node. And again, this is an operator decision. We're not going to try to remove things automatically for you. That'd be sort of the wrong assumption to make. It's really a judgment call by a person. And you can move data out of it and then once you've moved all, say, the different predicates from one shard to another, you can then remove the node. And from a Dgraph standpoint, we would just no longer acknowledge that node. If it tries to rejoin the cluster, we say, hey, you've already explicitly tried to remove this. So if you want to add a new alpha, you can, but this existing one that you already removed, like, it shouldn't be part of the cluster. And all the decisions here are, hey, should I add a new node, a new alpha or 0 to the cluster, or should I remove one? Everything about, the correctness of the data, moving data around, replication, that's all handled by Dgraph. We would, synchronously replicate the data from one alpha to another, and we wouldn't even try to return to you back inquiries any, say, stale data while it's still transferring it over. We would wait until everything is replicated to the latest state for that alpha to reply back to you. So from an application standpoint, you're not going to see any stale reads or incorrect reads.
And remember, Dgraph was and is the first graph database to graph and GraphQL database to have been Jepsen tested. So Jepsen actually does all of these things, and we don't see any transactional guarantee violations. So your data from the app perspective, it should be almost like app should know that these things are happening in the back. Go ahead, Tejas.
There was just a related question in chat: will performance be affected while the predicates are being moved around?
Yes to that. I think what happens is when we move predicate around shards, when we move from one shard 1 to shard 2, or group 1 to group 2, that predicate becomes read-only for that period of time when the move is happening. And during that time, the writes to that particular predicate, they would fail. Other predicates would work just fine, and you can still read from that predicate, you just cannot write to that predicate. So there will be some impact there. Okay.
Manish, yeah, before we move forward, I know it's very tempting to post your questions in the chat because it's so easy and everybody in the Zoom. So let's explain some the reason why we decided to post the questions on Discuss is because we want to create this knowledge base, and you guys ask all these awesome questions. We want to give the answers. If it's only lives in Zoom, it just too bad for the rest of the community cannot see them. So that's why we are decided to move all the questions to Discuss. So thank you so much for your understanding, and it's for the benefit of the larger community. And I mean, searched on.
You might have noticed that we are big fans of Discourse at Dgraph. They didn't pay us for it; we just fans. So we just like to use it wherever we can. Next question is, what are the best practices for data backup? So I think a lot of people actually confuse this. So the Dgraph already has data export in the open source version. So if you are open source user, you can continue to be an open source user by just using data export, and you can re-import the data using bulk loader or live loader or something. But Dgraph also has an enterprise feature for backup to the cloud in the binary format, which is a faster way to re-import it back, but then also has incremental backups and all that stuff that you expect from today's databases. So the enterprise version actually has more features and is sort of like is binary compatible and so on and so forth. But the open source still has a decent way by which you can do an export and bring it back. So are there like best practices around data backup?
Best practices, I mean, definitely schedule it to some frequency, take periodic backups to the degree where you want the backup to happen. So say you want, the last hour of data in case you want to restore it back to a new cluster. You can like set it so you can have backups every hour, and then you can correspondingly do the restores to say separate clusters or to replace the current cluster you're currently running. But definitely scheduling is important. The question about system data, like which system data is absolutely critical for restore points. Maybe you can elaborate more on that, but the way I'm reading that is like what's important to back up. Definitely if you do a data export, that's like all the data you need to restore that back to a brand new Dgraph cluster. It even keeps the same UIDs around if you say run that export through live loader, or you want to load it really quickly through bulk loader. The same UIDs are persisted, all the same edges and and values are there as well. Even your schema is the same, so all the indices would be set up as well. What are the best practices for a disaster recovery? Again, you have these backups. You can do the restores to a brand new Dgraph cluster in that case.
But I think disaster. I mean, there's so many disasters which could happen, and it could be different things, right? So I think if let's say Dgraph like alpha crashes, and I think most common reason for crash is generally an out of memory, and Ibrahim and I just like had a nice like few hour sessions like for the last 2 days to fix that. So we are working on that. But if Dgraph crashes, like alpha crashes and comes back up, that's normal. Like that's not an issue really. Like there's no data loss by it. So those things are like relatively okay to happen. I think a disaster issue might be that you lost the data because the disk actually crashed, the hard disk crashed or something of that sort, in which case restores would help. Or maybe like removing the node and adding the node back would help if you have replication, because then you can get a fresh snapshot from the reader. So there's like, just depending upon what the issue is, there is like so many different ways to deal with it. And hopefully we have made some of those clear in the documentation, but if you want to create a discuss topic and say, hey, this is the disaster scenario, what do I do? That would actually be helpful. Then we can answer those and tell you how to deal with it. The fourth question is my favorite. What to do if there's a data corruption in Badger? I'm going to let Ibrahim take this.
Right. So there are kinds of corruptions, as in essentially corruption could mean that you just lost one file, or maybe let's say your file got, you wrote something which you cannot read back and Dgraph cannot start. So either way, first thing is you just save that directly. If there's data on it, then it can recover, right? Maybe it does not start automatically, but I can give it a push and it will start. But the point is to just store that directory so that we can bring it back up. But there's not straightforward way. There are tools here. For instance, there's a flatten tool, right? Which will essentially flatten the LSMP and rewrite some of the data, which would help in case of a corruption. But again, it depends on what kind of corruption it is, right? So, I mean, do not delete that directory and raise a discuss post, and I will help you push it through. As in, if it's corrupted, we can again bring it back. There might be some data loss if you have written something wrong, but again, you might just lose some bits of it. As in, and we can mostly sometimes what happens is you have maybe written towards the end of it, there's some metadata that's not written correctly or something. So we can again open it up and as in there are tools, right? For instance, flatten or rewrite it. So those things could be done. So do not delete in case you.
But I think like we don't really see data loss with Badger per se.
Yes.
I mean, in fact, there's actually a bounty that you guys, if you want to like avail, we have like a bounty and we give out like $1337. So like $1,300-ish to anybody who can prove data loss with Badger. And it's been around for like at least like 1.5 years now, I think. It's been around for a while. So we don't really see a lot of like data loss with Badger. I guess corruption with Badger might only be if you deleted a file, like not that Badger deleted a file, but you actually went in and somehow deleted a file. Then how do you get Badger to run again and stuff like that? So those are things that I think Ibrahim is talking about. But we do like there's so many things that you do to make sure that file system registers all the files that are written to it, and we have done like tons of things there. There actually is a talk that I gave, I think in Shanghai or something, about all the different things that you need to deal with when you're writing files to file system. So anyways, I think again depends upon what kind of data corruption. It like Badger should not be corrupting data, but you could be corrupting data, or your hard disk might be crashing or something of that sort. Could be data loss because of that. Then I think how do you deal with it? Is an official integration with Datadog coming up?
So we definitely support Datadog. I've seen a number of installations of Dgraph where Datadog is critical to monitoring and just make sure Dgraph is up and running. So we have traces in OpenCensus format. There's an integration with OpenCensus agent to push things to Datadog automatically. In terms of monitoring, we export metrics in the standard Prometheus format, and Datadog knows how to read that as well. So, you can, and for say application logs from Dgraph instances, you can also hook up a Datadog agent to read those logs. So, definitely, there's official support for Datadog. In terms of like integration and steps, I feel like we can do better with documentation for that if that's what you're looking for. But people have been using Datadog with Dgraph already.
The next question is, how does ludicrous mode work and when should it be used? So ludicrous mode actually like works by it basically removes the idea of transactions from Dgraph. So Dgraph is by default it's very much designed like Spanner, so it has like strict distributed transactions and so on and so forth. Somebody is typing, I think, and it's causing some noise. So can you please, yeah, thanks, Annie. So Dgraph is designed to give very strict guarantees, distributed transactions, like that's the whole thing about Jepsen testing. It can do like financial transactions as well without losing data, and does natural isolation, so on and so forth. So what ludicrous mode does is that it takes away the idea of transactions from Dgraph, and that allows us to like do a lot more writes concurrently. And that level of guarantee that Dgraph provides at that point is similar to any other NoSQL database like MongoDB or Cassandra or whatever else that came from the era before Spanner. So it basically gives you higher performance, higher write performance, and takes away the strict transactional guarantees that you would get. So it gives you eventual consistency, right? But Dgraph by default gives you strict consistency. So if you do a write, you're guaranteed to see that write with however you read it, doesn't matter. But in this one, you do a write, it's possible that your read would read it after like a couple of tries, which is exactly how Cassandra works and exactly how MongoDB works and so on and so forth. So that's the ludicrous mode. And when should it be used? We recommend it when people have extremely heavy like write heavy use cases. So like a whole bunch of people actually want to do upserts really fast and they are moving away from Cassandra or MongoDB to Dgraph. And they don't really necessarily care about strict transactional guarantees. In those cases, we always recommend using ludicrous mode because they're not losing anything, but they are gaining like so much in terms of graph capabilities. All right. So moving to the next question is, I'd like to see some real use case of Dgraph combined with GraphQL, use cases which involve some logic beyond the auto-generated CRUD operation. Pawan?
It's more of a question of just seeing more integration and like essentially getting more posts around how we can have a crowd how we can have Dgraph integrated with Apollo and stuff like that. So it's something that we are going to come up in the next month or so. We are going to have some posts about how can you integrate Dgraph with your Apollo server and with Dgraph acting as a middleware. But yeah, I mean, we are currently working on more use cases to show you different ways in which you can use Dgraph. So you should be able to see this coming up in the next couple of months.
Yeah. And I think again, like some of the custom logic that we have and the JavaScript custom logic that we are thinking about would help you to like go beyond the typical CRUD, and like add stuff like, like for example, if you're writing like a question answering site, then the most interesting questions and get that in a single crawl from GraphQL, stuff like that. The next one is, what will happen with GraphQL plus minus? Will all great GraphQL plus minus features like facets, aggregation, transactions, upserts, math functions, all be modeled in GraphQL, or will some of these features be missing forever in Dgraph? Okay, so let me just clarify. So GraphQL plus minus is not going away. It's going to stay. We are thinking about renaming it. We have a poll out there where we are suggesting, should we keep it to plus minus? Should we call it DGraphQL? Should we call it DQL? So if you are interested, Sunny, if you can put the link there, people can go and vote. And so sooner we'll find a maybe slightly better name than what we have right now. So it's not going away. We're going to have it. The question now is like, how many of these features can we move to GraphQL? And I think that's a harder question, because GraphQL being is designed to be simple. And it's designed to deliberately have like less number of features so that as a spec, it can be easily written by many different companies, which don't all have the same requirements. So we have a bit of a challenge here in how much GraphQL plus minus has a lot of power. Things like variables, like those don't even exist in GraphQL, and there's no easy way to make those exist in GraphQL. So so we actually have a discussion, and I think is that posted externally, Pawan?
Yep.
Where we are talking about what can we port to GraphQL and how many of them we can port to GraphQL. Can you like quickly give a take on that?
Yeah, so just one more thing I want to mention here is that what we'll be doing is we'll be tackling this in two steps. The first step is going to be that we allow you to run GraphQL plus minus queries behind GraphQL API, and then you get back a response, and you can get that response back through your GraphQL API. So that's something that's already there. We added that by doing advanced queries so that you can run DQL queries and get back the response and work with the response. The second step is going to be that we are going to look at all the features in GraphQL plus minus and see whatever can we support natively, we'll go and support that natively. So for example, some of the things that would come first is being able to run things like count queries, being able to do things like math. So like some things which are simpler to do, we'll be starting with them. And there is a, like we have a discussed post about this in which we go over all the GraphQL plus minus features and talk about how easy or hard is it to migrate it to GraphQL. So I can link to that post, but that's essentially that what we're going to do. First step is just for you, like just essentially enable the user to get the power of GraphQL plus minus query and get back the response as a GraphQL response. And the second is going to be able to do that in GraphQL itself without ever having to write any GraphQL plus minus.
Yeah, so basically add as many features as we can add to GraphQL, but the ones that we just don't think we can add, like Facets is a very interesting one. Facets is just hard to do in GraphQL because of the fact that GraphQL doesn't have the concept of data living on the edge, right? So those things, maybe the best thing to do would be just to run it via the custom logic stuff and convert that over to GraphQL. Okay, so next question is, sorry, I'm missing the thread here. Where is it? What is the timeline for integration with Kafka? In the meantime, what are the best practices for streaming data into Dgraph? Timeline for integration with Kafka, I think we were hoping to do it this year, but with the slash GraphQL that we have not officially launched yet, but you can still sort of like sign up and start using it. Slash GraphQL has taken up a lot of our bandwidth, and we have added so many abilities to it, and we are also like adding ability to run Dgraph and run plus minus. So if you want like a hosted Dgraph, slash GraphQL can also like kind of expose that. So that has taken up a whole bunch of our focus, and so we don't think this year the integration with Kafka would happen, but what we were thinking about is potentially having a way to subscribe to updates happening in Dgraph. And those might be possible easily. So we might not integrate with Kafka directly, but we can give you a stream of updates happening in Dgraph, which you can then take and push it to Kafka or whatever you want to do. So best practices for streaming data into Dgraph, I think that's relatively straightforward, right? So you can have your code, which is reading from Kafka or wherever else, and it's just sending mutations to Dgraph via Dgraph client. That should work. So we don't necessarily need to do anything special there. So putting data into Dgraph is generally straightforward. It's generally like the kind of question that we get asked is like, how do I get a stream of updates happening in Dgraph? Those are the ones that we are thinking about having some simple solution for in the meantime. Is it possible to use the Dgraph4j client to cancel request after it has been sent to server? As a Go user, I think it's definitely possible because you have a context object and the context can be canceled and the query gets canceled. And then internally in Dgraph as well, even if we are busy running the query, we have so many things internally to deal with the canceled context. So we can actually like stop executing the query. So the context actually like does a lot of work for us. Now, I know the Java version is quite somewhat different. So who is a good Java person to talk about this?
In the question, the user says that, Dan says, hey, I've used the Java Dgraph client with the interceptor to trigger cancels. That's definitely the way to do it in Dgraph4j. But you're wondering if it actually cancels the query on the other end. So these are gRPC cancels. So same way that Manish is saying, in the Go client, you have context and you can cancel them. These are the same exact gRPC cancellations on Java client and all the other clients as well. So this is the same gRPC cancel that would cancel the query from Dgraph server.
I've noticed that earlier versions of Dgraph have significantly better performance with certain kinds of queries, those with type filters, than newer versions. Is that a known fact? Do we know that?
I think we had to discuss post about, hey, with the new type system, if you do filters with a type function, it can be slower. We have like ways to rewrite the query to do that. But yeah, the discussion there was, hey, when we have a query planner, we can be more smarter about how we can do these filters.
Right. Yeah, the filters actually are run in a pretty straightforward order, in the order that you give us those filters. So manually you can like tweak the query around. But yeah, so in terms of query planner, I think again this year might not be possible. We'll try to see if we can execute it next year. The great thing about GraphQL is that generally like the order in which things should be run is pretty straightforward. So just a bit of intelligence around how do we execute filters would probably like make a big difference to the users. In the meantime, just play it. So what I've seen with our users and customers is that the queries that they run are generally the same. So, they come up with like, let's say 20, 30 queries that they run on Dgraph. And even if the data scales or the app scales, like the number of queries are generally the same. So there's some time that you can spend on looking at the query a bit carefully and seeing if we can like massage the query to make it more optimized manually.
Sorry, Manish. So I wanted to ask you, in the meantime, do things like Jaeger tracing and stuff, would that also help you try to figure out your hotspots so you can optimize?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Jaeger tracing would be great. Distributed tracing is great in general. And if you're seeing any latency issues with the queries, please run distributed tracing. We have great integration. We like Jaeger. You can also integrate with others. I think we like Jaeger. We use Jaeger, and you can see which part of the query is expensive, and see if they can massage the query slightly to make it cheaper. But general rule of thumb is that start with the smallest data set first, and then go from there, right? The strictest part of the query first and go from there. And the great thing about Dgraph is that because we have these query blocks, you can execute some blocks in parallel concurrently by having them be node dependent on each other, and then use the results like in later blocks. Features and improvements planned for subscriptions. Feature parity between GraphQL plus minus and GraphQL. Sorry, I'm not reading this right. Let me go back. Okay. Feature parity between GraphQL plus minus and GraphQL, timeline for it. Do we have a timeline for it, Pawan?
We don't have a timeline for porting all the features, but essentially as part of 2011, what we'll allow is that you should be able to execute a GraphQL plus minus query and get back the response as a GraphQL response. So we'll enable running GraphQL plus minus queries with the custom directive. So that's coming up for 2011, but we don't have a timeline for porting all the features natively to GraphQL.
Yeah.
And in the meanwhile, like I know that somebody's linked the post of what we need to do to get feature parity. If there's a particular feature that you're interested in, please go over there and upvote.
Yeah, I think the way we are thinking about executing this is to look at the low-hanging fruits, things which are easier to port to GraphQL, and just go with that first. And then depending upon what else sort of makes sense and has a lot of like interest, we can then port them accordingly. But I think ultimately it would never be complete because of the limitations of GraphQL. Therefore, like having the JavaScript-based executor or custom logic is going to be the ultimate answer to any of this. Features and improvements planned for subscriptions. Do you know that?
We don't have anything planned, but if there's like if you guys have something specific in mind that you'd like to see as a feature or improvement, then you can post it on Discuss, and we can look into it. We can look into it and look into supporting it.
Yep. Examples with authentication and stuff. I think we covered that before, right? So Anthony has a bunch of questions. ETA for implementing count on the GraphQL endpoint, taking into consideration auth rules. I can count all using DQL custom field, but then that does not take into consideration any auth rules. Counting in GraphQL, essentially.
Yeah. So I think for counting and math functions, these are two things which should not be that hard to support. So we'll look into supporting it as part of the 2011 release that we do.
There's also a related question, I mean, in the same block about, does ad subscriptions work with ad auth rules yet?
Yeah, so essentially it was a bug that was there and it's going to be resolved and it should be available in 2007.1, which goes out this month. So it's already fixed in master and it will go out in the next patch release of the 2007 series. And there were, sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
So I was just saying there were two more questions. We have two more bugs that are there that Anthony talked about. One is grandchild is not attached to child in deep nested mutations. So that's another thing which I have a fix for, and then there is a PR for that. That just needs a bit more testing and should be merged like early next week and should be available as part of the patch release. And then there's another issue about Cascade does not work with pagination. That's something that we've not looked at yet, but it would be looked at, it would be looked at with priority as it's a bug. So we'll have folks looking at it in the next week, and we should soon have something for it. I also see something about integrating with Apollo Studio. We have not looked into that again, but I think there's something that has come that like it's been requested by users a couple of times. So we'll talk about it and we'll see if something needs to be done there, or if we can just have like a post around it to just make it easier for folks to integrate with it.
Is there anything more that you want to take from that question?
There's also a question about custom JS, like custom JS hooks. It's something that we are working on, and we'll keep on refining the RFC. And I've like we are also responding to answers on the RFC and things that people are talking about. So if you have any things that you would like to see in that particular feature, I'd just recommend going to the RFC and asking for what you're looking for, and then we can look into supporting it. But the basic idea is that we essentially want to give you a way to have like a pre and a post hook. So when your request is resolved through Dgraph, you have like a pre hook in which you can execute some JavaScript to be able to modify the input. Or in the post hook, you should be able to do things like count or something else to be able to modify it and get back the data that you're looking for.
Right. And I think I do want to be, because I built this tweet site, so tweets.dgraph.io using /GraphQL and GraphQL and running on /GraphQL. And even I could feel that the CRUD operations that we generate for GraphQL are not sufficient, particularly when you want to do stuff like, I want to show how many tweets are available for a particular query. I don't have that option right now. So we are pretty aware of those limitations. And that's why we're working on like having this custom JS. I think not just hooks, but just like custom JS logic that can be run. So I can then run the plus minus queries to like get all the interesting data I want to get, and then like show it back as GraphQL. There is a great question here about, are there upcoming plans on performance increases to increase speed and reduce memory usage? Memory has become sort of like Achilles heel of Dgraph. We get a bunch of like memory issues. A lot of people actually like see out of memory issues with Dgraph. Now, we have wrecked our heads against Go GC for a while. I love Go, by the way. I love Go. But Go GC or any GC based language has issues. And so we are looking into ways by which we can avoid that by using a lot of sort of C-based allocations, C++-based allocations. So Ibrahim and I sort of like, as I was saying before, spent some time on doing allocations using malloc, calloc, and free, and it seems to work quite well, and decrease memory usage in Badger quite a lot. And generally, Badger memory usage is what we see in Dgraph, and so I think we should have some great solution for that. Now, I think we are sort of like almost out of time here, but if you guys want, we can extend another 15 minutes. So maybe what we do is we just extend that, and then if people have to leave, feel free to leave. And again, we will try to update the community call discuss topic with all the answers that we have given and all the answers that we have not given. But we'll just expand to another 15 minutes so that we can answer some more questions right now. And I think like in terms of increasing speed and reducing memory usage, I feel like we actually still have ways to like decrease the memory usage without impacting speed. So we think we can do much better than where we are right now. So you will definitely see memory requirements like being a lot more reasonable in the future releases. Hello, I'd like to know if there is a timeline or plan to allow fully custom resolvers in Golang or JavaScript. I think we mentioned that, right? So that's definitely something we're working on. One question on GraphQL plus minus. What are the current capabilities around control, flows, looping, Turing completeness for the query language? We don't necessarily trying to expand the plus minus right now. I think again depends upon what you guys are looking for. Please feel free to like create feature requests for plus minus. And depending upon, generally the way we deal with feature requests is we look at how popular they are. So if other people come in and they like hard those features or upvote those features or whatever, then we would consider it for addition. But we are generally like conservative when it comes to features because, you know, as a database, you always are on the side of stability over like stability and bug fixes over adding more features. So we would consider them if they are popular, or if they just make so much sense that we think that, yes, we should absolutely add them. So make your case. And the good way to make a case for feature requests is to use the experience report format. And I think our templates in Discuss are set up accordingly. So you explain what you wanted to do and what you could not do with Dgraph today and how you had to get around it if there was a way. And that helps us decide if we want to add that feature or not. Kind of a meta question. I see that GitHub Issues was retired recently. I'm curious to know what your experience with that has been, pros and cons. The reason we retired GitHub Issues was that a lot of GitHub Issues were actually just discussions that should have been had on Discourse. And the big benefit that I've seen since moving to Discourse completely is that now we can actually get all kinds of things, which are feature requests, bug fixes, bug reports, or just discussions happening on Discourse. And depending upon how we categorize them, we can move them accordingly to the right category. So that lets us actually have issues that we actually want to work, that we can work upon. In GitHub Issues, what was happening was that a lot of these issues had no clear done state. They were just questions, they were just discussions. It was not clear what we needed to do there. So those are completely gone after having moved to Discourse. In terms of cons, we're still figuring out what is the right way for us to close an issue. Discourse allows closing just like GitHub does, but GitHub allows you to reopen an issue and Discourse does not. So that's the big difference there, and we are trying to figure out what's the best way to deal with that.
Manish, I believe you missed a question. There was one question about can you expect custom subscriptions with, custom queries with subscriptions. Pawan, would you like to answer that? Presumably, I'm guessing that's for DQL bits, not for the remote bits.
Yeah, that's actually something that we have not thought about yet. Because if you're executing custom queries with subscriptions, then eventually what's happening is you would have to make remote calls as a subscription, and then you can get into these problems of essentially polling and like polling some custom endpoint too much. So that's something that we are not looking into actively right now.
And again, I think if you have ideas or feature requests, feel free to like create those experience reports, and we can look at it carefully. Question: any plan to have distributed service hosting Badger DB? A distributed service hosting. I'm more interested in distributed key value store. So essentially like a slash GraphQL, but with a distributed key value store. Is that right? Is that the right question to answer? So let me answer from two levels. So I have two different understandings of this question. One is that, are we building a sort of like a distributed Badger DB like layer on top of it? No, but it's a very interesting challenge that I would love to tackle. but we are a graph database company, and so we would rather focus on that. But if I had extra cycles, I would love to tackle that. But I think it makes a great project for anybody here. I do know that etcd, there was some discussion about using Badger DB for etcd, and there was probably even a PR for that. So maybe if you are interested, you could actually switch over etcd's database from Bolt to Badger, and that might be a way to get probably not distributed but replicated Badger. Are we going to build a service around it? Probably not. I think we can't, like, because we are not focused on key value database, we can't do as good of a job as MongoDB can. And so I don't think we are going to focus on that.
Also, just to add, there is an open source project which is actually a distributed version of Badger. So there's an open source project called CETE, which is essentially built on top of Badger. So it performs all the, it has draft and stuff, and it takes care of all those things. It's not hosted, it's on GitHub. I'll share the link on the Discuss post.
Yeah. Since the changes, you just showed changes to the latest, will the responses ever include the version of Dgraph so the clients will know what version the server they're connecting to is running? We have a version endpoint, right? For people to know what version of Dgraph it is running?
Yeah, that should be already available. There's like a version of method you can run in the clients.
Right.
If anything, you can also check the /health endpoint over HTTP, and that would also give you the version information from Alpha.
Yep. What's the best way to scale Dgraph across multiple geographical locations? We can ask this question a bunch, and I think we had done some benchmarks before in the past. Do you remember those, Daniel? Between, like, in different areas within the US?
Yeah, and we've also done the measurements for different latencies. I think if it's not already published already, I can get the Discuss link and share it in this thread as well.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's a simulation that we ran, right? So if the network slows down by this much, what is the actual impact on queries and stuff?
Yep.
Yeah, that actually can be very useful. So depending upon, like, how bad the latency is between the geographical regions, you can look at that benchmark. It's like a table, just shows you like what will happen to queries and mutations. When we see single predicate sharded across groups from roadmap being worked upon, yeah, it's again, it's something that we want to get to. There's multiple things though. One is that we haven't really seen any actual like real need for it so far. Like, we haven't come across any use case where they said, look, this is clearly, it's just not possible with what with like the way we do sharding today. Having said that, I can imagine reasons like where it would be problematic, and so we definitely want to get to it. Probably not this year, and if it's not this year, then by default the answer is like probably next year. But we definitely have it in the back of our minds and in our list of things to do, and it's something we want to get to. What is the recommended GraphQL client for Golang? Pawan?
We don't really have any recommended client because if you're making GraphQL calls, you can just make a HTTP call, and all that you need is a struct in which you can read back the response. And if you're using subscriptions, then we actually have a client that we have built and that we have built internally for testing subscriptions. So I can link that as the answer to the post. But apart from that, usually people just use the normal net HTTP client, make the calls and unmarshal the response.
Yeah. When will the auth directive support remote queries for authorization as an alternative to JOT with custom claims?
I'll handle that.
Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
so I mean, I'll handle that. A few people in the post are asking why you do this. This is typically what an API gateway would do, where you kind of get a simple cookie or a very empty JWT, and you kind of fill that out using a remote endpoint. We do know that some of our popular API gateways and stuff do that. We do have it on the roadmap, but I can't give you a definite timeline for that just yet. Hopefully, it should be towards the end of this year, though. There was actually one more question which asked by the same user. The question was, do we see any examples of people using Dgraph as a time series database, similar to say an InfluxDB?
We do see a bunch of people actually using that like that. I mean, I just want to put a disclaimer there that we did not necessarily design Dgraph to be time series database. If we were to design it like that, then it would have to contain a bunch of automatic aggregators and like removal of data points and so on and so forth, which we don't do. But if it's like as a lightweight time series database, absolutely, because we actually have pretty nice like date time indexing and aggregation already there, because we wanted to have a really strong, great daytime support. And we have had great daytime support since the beginning of Dgraph. So yes, as a lightweight time series database, it can be used. But it's, as a disclaimer, it's not designed to be a time series database. Next question, how can I check admin related stuffs like number of alive connections connected to Dgraph? And what are the prerequisites before starting Dgraph, like NUMA, THP should be enabled or not? Daniel.
That's a good question. I think if we have metrics coming out of Dgraph about, you know, active queries and active mutations, but probably nothing specifically about number of connections. So that's something we should add. And what was this other part of the question? I didn't quite get it.
What are the prerequisites before starting Dgraph, like NUMA, THP should be enabled or not?
Oh, okay. So NUMA or transparent huge pages. So like more kernel parameter settings. Yeah, we have a production checklist section of our documentation that tells you more about these certain settings that you can tweak. I think the one that's it's sort of important is just to set the file descriptor limit to be higher than the default, which is typically like 1024, because Dgraph can have lots of open files at any given time. Like you will probably reach that limit sooner rather than later, depending on your data set.
All right, that's actually the last question.
Sorry, I'll take one last question. Now I kind of mute myself at the wrong time. How awesome would it be to have a working example / template in Nuxt.js handling roles and oath?
That's another interesting question, and it's something that we'll be working on. As I said, we'll be adding like more examples and more use cases of using Dgraph GraphQL along with other frameworks like React, Nuxt, and Vue.js and all these other frameworks. So that's something that's going to come up in the next couple of months.
Awesome. That's for all the questions. And again, I think we'll try to answer the questions on Discourse. For the ones that we answered here, as well as the ones that we did not get to answer today. Over to you, Zenny.
All right, thank you everyone. That wraps up the Dgraph's first community call. I know we have almost 80 of you guys joining us from all over the world, so thank you very much. I think the next step later today, we will post our video on YouTube channel, and we will also send it to your inbox. And then I will work with our office manager to get all the t-shirts shipped to you guys.
Thanks again for joining today, guys. And I think maybe we should like run a small poll to see if this timing works for everyone, or should we like run slightly earlier? Should we run slightly later? So we can probably open up that poll as well, so people can give their opinions. Yeah, but thanks a lot, guys. It was great having you, and look forward to seeing you again in the next community call.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
folks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.